Welcome everybody to this online training for supporting our speakers at the World Physiotherapy Congress 2021 online. We're just after the hour, so we will start and expect a few more people to join us as we go along. So this session is particularly designed to support our presenters in key sessions. My name is Tracy Berry. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive Officer at World Physiotherapy and responsible across all areas of the Congress, and work very closely with Birgit, my colleague, and the rest of the team supporting the Congress Programme Committee, delivering the scientific programme. So we recognise that presenting internationally and also presenting online is something that may be new to many of you, but probably many more of you have done it over the last 12 months. So before we start, just a few housekeeping notices. You've all joined us on mute and with cameras off. This is just to manage the webinar. We are using the Q&A function. So on your Zoom controls, you will find there is the question submission. So if you have got questions, please submit those at any point during this webinar, and we have built-in time throughout the course of the hour. There's also the chat function, and what we'd like you to do is to go to that chat function now, and at the bottom, make sure the control is pointing to comments to everyone rather than just to the panelists. And once you've done that, if you could perhaps type in where you're from, where you're joining us from, and what kind of session you're participating in at Congress, that'll give us a feel for who out there is joining us today. So we are anticipating that the webinar will last about 60 minutes. We can stay on for longer if anybody's questions have not been answered. We're also recording the session, so anybody who hasn't been able to join two of the offers of this particular one can come back to it, or you can come back to it at any time as well. During the course of the webinar, if you have any problems, my colleague Rachel in the office is on standby on the info@world.physio mailbox, and she'll be pleased to support you with any queries that may come up. So great, welcome to everybody that's joining. Nice to see some familiar names there, and quite a wide variety from California all the way over to New Zealand. Shows us some of the challenges of working across time zones. So today in particular, we're focusing on the discussion sessions and the inspiration sessions. These are two types of live sessions that will be shown during the 3 Congress days, and none of these have PowerPoint presentation included in them. So what we're covering during this session is just a brief overview of those 2 session formats. We'll introduce you to the online platform. We'll provide you with some question time around that particular component. And then I'm going to hand over to Helen von Dadelsen from Present Potential, who is joining us to deliver this presenter support training. And Helen worked with us in preparation for the 2019 Congress. Excellent feedback from our presenters, and we've worked to adapt that for this online event. Helen's going to be trying to get you interacting, and also we'll build in question time, and then we'll end with a few date reminders. So before we start, we'd like to just ask a question of all of you by running a quick poll. How confident do you feel about presenting at the Congress online? So Rachel, if I can ask you just to launch it, fantastic, thank you. And if all of you can just complete that, that would be great, thank you. Okay, I think we can close the poll and show the results. So the majority of you feel okay or confident. Somebody doesn't feel not very confident. So we hope very much over the course of this webinar, we'll ask you again at the end how you're feeling, and hope that we've moved you on. So let's come to an example of a discussion session. So this is the classic format that you would probably recognise if you've been to one of our congresses or many other congresses before. It's around the speakers on the stage, there's a chair, there's someone who's helping to moderate and panel members. And then it's really important to focus on the audience as well. So this is a 60-minute live session. The chair will help guide all of the discussion. The panel members are there preparing with their contributions. Then the aim is to get a lot of interaction from the audience. Now, in the online platform, your audience you can't see and you can't hear, but they will have both the same functionalities that we've talked about today. They can add comments into the comments area, general chit chat, which could again be saying where they're from, or maybe there's a particular point that resonates. But there's also going to be the question submission. Now they can submit questions and those will be public. That also gives the opportunity for other participants in the session to vote them up, showing people the ones that perhaps have more interest. The moderator, who's assigned to support all the panels and work with the chair in the development, is going to be the voice of the audience. They're going to put the questions to the chair and panel members. They're all physiotherapists, senior physiotherapists who work across areas, not necessarily topic expertise, but this is around bringing those questions for the panel to contribute to. These discussion sessions also have the option of using polls, and in all of the planning sessions, this will be a topic for the group to think about, whether there is a poll that they could put out to the audience to get some audience interaction. Inspiration sessions are a little different. These are 25 minutes, and these are about a chair with only 1 or 2 speakers. They're much more about a conversation, an interview, a storytelling approach. And for this, there is only the chat function enabled, the comments area. There's no additional moderator or question and answer or polls because they're quite short, and the focus is on being inspired by the person that you have in front of you. Now, these sessions will all be appearing in the live area of the Congress platform. And I will show you a shot in a minute, which will then show you how this is appearing once sessions are live. And they're going to be recorded. And once recorded, they will move to the on-demand area. So during the live Congress days, if you hit on the Live Now button, it will show you what is streaming at a particular time. And just to emphasize, this is test data on the screen, but as of tomorrow, we will be launching the online platform. And all of you will have received your date and time notices this week already. So all the sessions are running across 6 channels, and this allows people to make their choices as you would on site with the equivalent of different rooms running. So if we take you into a session that's actually running, so if we went into one of those live sessions that is a discussion session, there is the flexibility here with the production team who are working on the sort of TV equivalent side to have a view of all the panel members, but also to zoom in on a particular speaker. So when the chair is introducing, it may well focus just on one person on screen. Then if it's comments, come out to all the different headshots. And then if there's a panel member making a contribution, perhaps zoom in on that as well. And that's all about, rather than being just a static picture of squares, there's some flow and change to the experience for both panel members and also for the audience. So that's a brief overview of the session formats. That's the discussion sessions and the inspiration sessions. So before I hand over to Helen, I just want to check if any questions have come in. There's nothing been added in the questions and nothing I can see in the chat, in which case, Helen, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to you to talk about how we can bring the best of everybody into these sessions.
Fabulous. Thank you, Tracy. As Tracy said, my name is Helen and I am a speaker, coach and trainer, and I'm here to help you prepare to have the best session that you can possibly have. If you do have other questions, we will make sure that we are addressing them. Maybe you haven't thought of something and it will come up a little bit later. So this evening, or it's evening for me, for you it might be first thing in the morning, I think, in New Zealand. This is what we will cover today. Audience, who are we speaking to? Being really clear on who you expect to be listening and watching your session. Messaging, even though you're not providing a PowerPoint, a presentation, there will be a message that you need to get across within the session, as well as personally as a presenter. Thirdly, we have the virtual setup. It's different from being in the conference center, and so there are other things that you need to think about in terms of how you set yourself up in the space. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about live presenting, because it is different again through the camera than it would be if you're sitting on the stage. So I've got some tips for you. I invite chat throughout my whole presentation, and I will pause at times to ask you to do an activity or to respond to something through the chat. So hopefully you'll keep awake for that. Now, when you first registered for this webinar, you answered a question. The question was, what are you most worried about when presenting on camera or virtually? And this is very interesting for us to know. It helps me to understand your concerns and make sure that I cover them within the session. So what did you say? Well, 69% of you, so vast majority, are worried that there is a lack of feedback, energy, and atmosphere from the audience. And this is indeed one of the biggest challenges about speaking online. You are sitting in your house or your clinic or your office, speaking into a black hole essentially, and you don't get any feedback. And sometimes it's really hard to keep up the energy when you don't have that immediate feedback. But I have some tips on how you can address that. The other thing that came up quite regularly was the concern about keeping the presentation interesting and engaging. And that is fabulous that there's concern of yours. That is also probably why you've taken the time to watch this webinar and to participate, because you know in the virtual space, people are distracted. They have other things vying for their attention. So we need to make sure our presentation is even more interesting and engaging so that the audience stays with the session, gets the key messages that you're giving them, and generally learns something from the experience. So I'll give some tips on how to do that as well. And the other thing that came up regularly, so 54% of you, was concerns around the Q&A. Now, whether you are in a discussion or an inspiration session, there are elements of a Q&A there. And this can be scary. How on earth do you practice for this? This is really the unknown. But I'm going to challenge that and say that you can actually practice for it. And I'm going to help you prepare for exactly that situation, whether it's the chair, another panelist, or the audience asking you questions. So first of all, how many of you have already been to a World Physiotherapy Congress? Just write in the chat, yes, no, maybe you've been multiple times. Maybe you came last time 2 years ago in Geneva. Yes, several. I imagine most of you are quite experienced presenters and possibly been involved. No, okay, Caroline hasn't been before. Don't forget to change the to all panelists and attendees. Sybil, yes, in Geneva, great. Many, Jeanette, great. So most of you have, maybe a couple of you haven't. So you know more or less who we're speaking to. But let me summarize for you. Who's going to be in the audience? Who's likely to watch your session? Well, it depends on many factors. It depends on what else is happening at the same time. Tracy mentioned that you are in parallel sessions, so the audience actually has a choice. And maybe there's something happening at the same time that would draw a particular audience to that subject or yours. So worth thinking about. It's quite difficult for us to predict because this is the first online congress that we've held, but we're hoping for about 3,000 participants. What we do know is that we will have a range of experience level. So you will have student physios right up to retired physios. We know that we will have different specialities level of experience. And so this is something to keep in mind as a presenter, to think about what the audience might already know about your topic. Remember, not everyone is an expert in your field, even though you live and breathe and drink your subject matter. Sometimes you may need to give more context and simplify or explain certain elements or technical words or things like that. For example, you might like to get rid of a few of your acronyms, which seem so familiar to you, but they're not necessarily to the rest of the audience. The other thing we know for sure is, just like this webinar, people will be tuning in from all over the world. And that means that many in the audience will not be English native speakers, and possibly many of the speakers aren't native speakers either. The sessions will be run in English, but we are experimenting with a cool interpretation function for people who need that additional support. But one thing about speaking on an international stage is that people will be listening to different accents, one after the other. So that's an interesting question already. In the chat, who can guess what my accent is? It's a funny one. I've lived for a long time away from my country of birth. Can anyone pick my accent? I think at least one person can. In the chat, where do I come from? Swiss origin, Aussie and English. New Zealand, Ireland, Brazil. Remember, Sibile, to change in the chat function to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your answers. Jeanette, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Yes, I am indeed from New Zealand, but I have lived abroad for many years, so my accent is a little bit harder to pick. But maybe the Kiwis amongst you and maybe the Australians would be able to tell that, no problem. So you just listen to Tracy introduce what types of sessions you'll be speaking in and what's expected of you. And then you had to tune your ear to my quite different accent. So Tracy comes from England. She's got quite a received pronunciation English accent, whereas I've got a funny, strange down under and English mix international thing. But you'll be hearing lots of accents from all over the world. And so it takes time for people to adjust. The other thing you need to take into consideration is to just simply slow down. When we're speaking on the international stage, not only do people have to tune their ear to your accent, but you also want to give opportunity for the interpretation to work well and for your message to come across loud and clear. So just slow down a tad, maybe even write it near your camera so you see it to remember to slow down when you're speaking, because we can get quite excited and our speed increases, and that can be a pity if people aren't able to follow along. So articulate and speak as clearly as you can, and of course avoid jargon that isn't very well known. The other thing that's important to note about the audience is that it'll be any time of day and night. So people might be coming home from work, they might be sitting down after dinner to watch your session, and that can have an effect on the audience. They may also be watching you on a smartphone on their way home, for example, or watching on a big screen. And this all has an impact on how you need to present and adapt your own presentation style. So now we know more or less who we're speaking to. It's a diverse audience and there are lots of things we need to keep in mind. The next thing you need to do is think about your message, to be focused on your key message. And what I find useful here is to think about what you want them to think, feel, or do after your session. Now, you're experts in your field. I imagine you have a lot of information to share. You could probably hold sessions for 2 or 3 hours on your own if you had to. But you're asked to speak on a specific topic in a specific context. So you need to sort of narrow down and focus yourself on that specifically. You can look at who else is speaking in the session, and you have the opportunity to talk to them in the planning meetings and talk about what the overall objective is of the session. I'd really encourage you to use the planning meetings to discuss the content, your approaches, and then find out how you fit into the bigger session. As Tracy explained, the audience will see all 4 or 5 faces as one complete session. So the more coherent you are together, the better the experience for the audience will be, and the stronger the message will be for them as well, and it will feel more professional and interesting. So what do you want them to do for this message? Maybe you want someone to offer you a collaboration, a partnership. Maybe you just want them to ask questions. Perhaps you have a new approach that you'd like people to try in a different setting. Maybe you're looking for a funder out there, someone to fund your work, or to test what you're doing or challenge what you're doing. Maybe you're being controversial. Maybe you have a totally new idea. And sometimes having an opposing approach can be interesting as well. The point of you presenting is to give the human element to your message, to your research, to your work and your area, really to bring it to life. And this is what we call the call to action or the key message. Being clear on this will really help you to choose what information you want to include in your presentation, in your interventions within the session. And obviously, no matter, even if you've got 25 minutes for the inspiration session, it's quite limited. You can't include everything there. You need to pick and choose what information to include. So to start you on this, I have some quick fire questions for you to help you start thinking about your own key message. The first one is, why should people be listening to you instead of someone else? As we said, there are multiple channels they could be watching, different sessions at the same time. Why should they tune in to listen to you? The second question that could help you is, what do you want them to remember about your research or your approach or your area of work? They don't want to just say, oh yeah, that was just another session, blah, blah, blah. You want them to walk away with a clear idea. So now I invite you to write down a few ideas, and you won't be able to craft these beautifully right now. We don't have enough time, but this is just to start you thinking about being clear about your key message. Write it down. I'm just going to put in the chat what the 2 questions are that will help you. Why should they listen to you instead of someone else? And what do you want them to remember about your presentation or your intervention? Now, you don't need to prepare a PowerPoint for these sessions, but you should be preparing, and you should prepare talking points. Ideally, you don't write a script because that can feel quite awkward and too prepared. But if you have some bullet points of the key messages you want to get across, then that's going to be very helpful for you during the session. So take the time to do that. Craft your message. Now, what we're really looking for, what helps the audience get your message loud and clear, is to have a catchy, like, sound bite. So for example, you can think of it as a bumper sticker, you know, at the back of the car, and you see a funny or a unusual saying or something like that. Just a few words that are catchy that'll keep you thinking. It could also be like a billboard, you know, when you're driving past on the highway and you see a few words and an image, you remember that afterwards if it's good marketing. So we're actually looking for a marketing soundbite for your message so that people can walk away. Now, a couple of tips of how to do that, how to develop your key message. Maybe you've already written down some ideas, but to turn it into a catchy soundbite or phrase, there are a couple of things you can do. You can use repetition. So for example, Steve Jobs said, stay hungry, stay foolish. Okay, so the repetition of stay helps us to remember that saying. You could use rhyme, for example. Make it better, hold it together. Or for example, my one that I like, I'll use a little bit later, is move it or lose it. Okay, so repetition of the it. The other thing is antithesis. So playing with opposites can be really powerful. The one that I really like is Dr. Seuss. He says, Sometimes the questions are complicated and the answers are simple. So he's playing on the opposites of complicated and simple. And of course, there are many opposites you could play with. Another thing that you could use is a metaphor. And there are hundreds of metaphors out there. But again, it paints a picture for people. It makes it memorable for yourself as well as the audience. And that's a really strong, catchy message. If you can find one of those for your session, for each presenter, then that's going to really help resonate your message with the audience, and they'll take it away in a very strong way. Simple language, but catchy, so people remember it. Now we've got our message. Obviously, you'll need some more time to think about this. Maybe you want to workshop it with some colleagues, and definitely talk about it in your planning session further. So now, as you have recognized, it's different when we're speaking virtually or online. If you imagine, most of you have been to a congress before, you are in a conference center together. There's a different vibe, a different feeling, and you've probably set aside dedicated time for the event. You've taken time off work or been allowed to take time off work. You've potentially flown to another part of the world. Your out of office message is on, and so you're less distracted. You're really there for the specific congress. Now, what's probably going to happen for the online congress is that people will be trying to fit in as much content as they can within an already very busy schedule. And so other things are vying for their attention. And because of that, we really need to step up our level to be more clear on our message, and then to be more energetic and engaging in our sessions. So it's worth them tuning in and not being distracted by their phone beeping or the doorbell ringing or anything like that. So how do we keep it energetic? How do we keep our passion? Well, you need to really engage the audience. That's the best thing. So Tracy has already said, given you a couple of clues on how you can do this, and you will talk about this in your planning session. But I wanted to give a few more tips as well. You can come up with a poll or an activity for the audience. So what could this be? Well, you could ask for an opinion on something. Maybe it's something that as a panel, you are torn between, you have different views, or maybe you're all on one side, but you want to see what the audience thinks, so you know where you're going. Maybe you want them to agree or disagree with a statement and get a little bit of contradiction happening. And then you could even take, one speaker could take the for and one speaker could take the against argument, and then you could tease that out into the session. Maybe you want to give them, 3 or 4 options of what they would usually do in a particular situation. For example, you can give a particular patient case and how would they approach it, and you could give a few options. And then as a panel, you could maybe you'll be pro or con certain options, or maybe you'd like to explore all of them. But all of these are ways of making the audience feel part of the session, plus it gives you actual content to work with in a nice structure. The other thing you could do is get the audience to commit to doing something after your session. And in fact, I do this at the end of my training, so you'll see how that's done. So as a group, you should really think about this carefully. What questions could you be asking the audience? What activities could you get them to do? You could even get them to do a physical activity as part of the session, even though you can't see them. Maybe you're exploring a new exercise or posture or something, and you could actually do an example and ask the audience to copy, to feel what it feels like. That's just a little suggestion. Anything like this can really help the audience feel engaged and part of it, and that will keep them with you. And it will also, if we're part of something, we're more likely to take the message to remember the message that we're given. One other thing that you could do is to potentially limit each speaker's interaction for 2 minutes at a time. For example, in the discussion sessions, that could work well. The chair could invite you to each give just one nugget of advice or insight at a time. And that helps you move or pass the baton quite quickly between the speakers and keeps it engaging and high energy. And then you might think, oh, that's not going to dig deeper enough. You could build in time where at some stage, a speaker or the chair could then go back to the speaker and said, well, that was an interesting suggestion you gave there. Can you elaborate? Can you tell us more? Okay, so that's how you can sort of build it into more, but at least then you get a wide variety of input in a short amount of time, and then you can dig deeper as you go forward. And for the inspiration session, so you have longer, so 25 minutes, but what we're not really looking for is a monologue, one person telling their story. What would be much more interesting is to have an interview style. So the chair would use the opportunity to have probing questions, which are pre-prepared between you, obviously, to help keep the variety and the changing of the voice and the approach, etc., throughout the session. And that can work really, really well. And it then becomes more of a conversation. Even though it's semi-prepared, it brings a human element and it keeps the session moving along. It's difficult for us to listen to one person for a long period of time. It starts to feel like a lecture. And what we're really looking for is a narrative or a story for these inspiration sessions. The other thing that you really need to think about is being complementary. As we've said, you are essentially sitting on the stage or sharing the screen with other people. And the more you think of yourself as a team, and the more harmoniously you work together, the better the experience will be for the audience. Remember, the audience is seeing you all together in one session. And so if you're coherent and complementary to each other, that'll be a better experience and the message will be stronger. Even if you have controversial subject and you have people who are on the panel who don't agree, at least working together and using that planning session to work out how you're going to work cohesively, that'll be great. So the planning meeting, some of you have probably already started having your planning meeting, but you can always have another one closer to the time after you've had time to reflect and think about things. I highly recommend having more than one planning meeting with your other session panelists and chair. So here you'll figure out who's speaking on what's the angle of each speaker, what's their speciality or their argument, and potentially what order it makes sense to be answering questions or having interventions. You can also think obviously about the interactive elements, so the questions, the polls, the activities that you want to pose to the audience. And you may also want to think about the rules for your session. So if you imagine us sitting on a stage in a conference center, if someone's going on too long, for example, the chair could quite easily sort of reach over or nudge them or catch their eye and sort of ask them subtly to, cut it off, wrap it up. That you wouldn't do that. I'm just exaggerating. But on the virtual stage, it's very difficult for us to do. So you might need to have some signs. One thing you can do, and you can agree to do it, is, and the technical team will also help you in this, but maybe the chair can sort of subtly bring up some sort of item which has a bright color to show to the speaker, and the audience might not even see it, but so that the speakers were looking out for it to know that they need to wrap up and they've gone a little bit longer. Another time when you might need some sort of signal is if someone says something and you personally really want to add to that or contradict it. And so maybe a simple hand raise, a physical hand raise, make sure you're in the camera, would be good enough. But you need to decide these things in advance and maybe even practice them on a practice session to see how they work so that it becomes a really smooth and coherent session altogether. The other thing that you have the opportunity to do is have a technical rehearsal, and this will be a great opportunity for you to see what the platform looks like, to understand how it'll look as a speaker and how you can then interact with the audience and the other speakers. The more comfortable you will feel with the technology, the better you will perform on the day. Okay, you'll feel more relaxed and you'll feel more comfortable, and you'll be able to concentrate on your message and not, oh, which button do I press now? Okay, so definitely attend those technical rehearsals. They will be very, very useful for you. Now, the other thing that some of you raised questions about was your concern around the Q&A. So this is a really common concern with lots of speakers in any situation. How do you prepare for the dreaded Q&A? Well, the good thing is you can prepare. So I have an activity for you. Again, take a moment to write these questions down. What question would you absolutely love to be asked during the session? Maybe it's the question that leads to your beautiful catchphrase. What question would you really like to be asked and really hope that you have the opportunity to address? And secondly, what one question would you really hate to be asked? That question that you shrug away, oh no, they didn't ask that, did they? Write it down. It's better to get it out there, and then you can actually think about how you can answer it rather than just hope that it doesn't come up. Okay, take a couple of seconds to think about it. What one question would you really like to be asked? And what one question would you really not like to be asked? Now, following this training, I would really encourage you to brainstorm all the possible questions on your subject. And what you can do then is to have short, again, very brief talking point answers under each question. And that will help you already gather your thoughts and feel more prepared. And you can even have them in a notebook or a piece of paper if you need to refer to. The step beyond that is to group those questions and answers into topics. And you'll find that you probably only have 5 or 6 different topics that those questions fit under. And what's great about this technique is that, one, it helps you remember which, well, especially if you're visual like I am, where it fits in your piece of paper or in your topics. And the other great thing is, if there is a question that you haven't thought of, chances are it will actually fit under one of these topics. And so you've already pre-prepared something that is related and will probably help you in addressing that question, because you have various questions under the same topic. The other thing is, you could possibly bend the question to a question that you have prepared an answer for. And then as a group, you can also think about, if these questions are asked, who would best be able to answer them? And the chair should take note of that. And maybe all of you want to answer it. Well, that's a great question then for a quick fire question. Agree or disagree? Mary, Jonathan, Jacob, and you get a agree, a disagree, agree, a disagree. Very quick, again, shakes things up a little bit and keeps it engaging and interesting. Maybe also you want to strategically think about opposing answers to some of those questions, which can be interesting as well. This is a really, excuse me, great trick in terms of preparing for any session, whether there is a Q&A or not. So this is also great for the inspiration session, where you're not getting questions from the audience, but it might help you frame also the questions or the dialogue that you have between the chair and the speaker. Now, in terms of answering questions in general, there's this great technique that I learned through recruitment that I find can be very, very helpful to frame your answers to questions, because it's all very well having your talking points, but then you want to be able to efficiently, concisely, and with really strong message behind it, answer that question. So this technique is called the STAR technique. Some people also know it as the CAR technique. So it's context instead of situation and task. But I like STAR because it breaks it down further. STAR stands for S, situation, T, task, A, action, and R, results. And this helps you frame your answer to have enough details to sort of tick off everything you need to include, but to remain concise and focused on the answer you need to give. So situation this is where you start. You describe the context, the characters, the when, the where, in what situation, etc. This is really the background information that you must provide for the audience to understand the rest of your answer, the rest of your story. Then you describe the task. What was the challenge that you were facing? What did you have to do? It's really the sticking point, the problem that you had to solve. Then the action, what you actually did, what actions or steps you took, the tools you used, the exercises you used to answer that challenge or that problem, to directly address that task that you've just outlined. And then finally, and it's really important that you include this, it's the results. This is the so what part of it. This is what happened as a result of your actions, what worked well, what didn't work well, then what did you learn? What was successful? What have you taken forward since then? For example, you might describe one particular patient who had a difficult case, and you tried something just by chance, slightly off what you would normally do, and you find that it works very well. And then your results would be, I never went back to the old way of doing things because I found this is so efficient. And since then, I've been working in this way for the last 10 years, for example. So STAR, situation, task, action, results, really helpful in framing anything, in fact. So what you can do with your, once you've prepared these questions and your bullet point answers, is you should work on practicing your answers. So to do this, you can work with a colleague, a friend, or a family member, where they can ask you some of these questions, and you can get used to getting your words around and your brain engaged to be able to answer the questions as concisely as you can. The other thing is just to breathe before you answer questions. There will always be a lag anyway online, and it's okay to breathe. It's actually really important. It gives you a chance to get oxygen to your brain already, but also to gather your thoughts, okay? Now, there are some problem questions, I would say, or situations that come up, and maybe some of you have had these before as well. The first one that many people ask is, what do I do if I don't know the answer? So have any of you had the situation where you've been asked a question, you don't know the answer? How have you dealt with it? Tell me in the chat. Tell us all in the chat how you would approach this. Or maybe you've seen someone else deal with it in a really, really clever way. If you don't know the answer, what do you do? Tell me what you would do. Don't be shy. Anyone? Thanks, Catherine. Acknowledge that it's a good question and that you don't have a clear answer. Great. Be honest and tell them you don't. Provide it later once researched it. Perfect. So acknowledge that it's a good question is a great one, because it stops them from shutting them down, and to encourage questions, which we, is part of a conversation. Then being honest and saying you just do not know. And that's normal. You are an expert in your field, but you don't have to know absolutely everything or have it at the top of your head. So that's fine. And what I really like with Jeanette gave was the next step. So how exactly, and Sybil's just added on there, how do you help them find the answer? So you can tell them you don't and provide it later once you've researched it. You can open it to the audience even, because there might be someone else in the audience who knows the answer. On the online space, it's probably even easier just to pass it to another colleague. Open it up and say, I'm actually not sure. Maybe so-and-so knows the answer here, or can give us some insight. Don't leave it there just saying, oh, I don't know. Next question. You know, if you can give some sort of resolution to them or lead them the right way, maybe you could say, I know that so-and-so did some research on that. Maybe you have look them up. Great. Yeah, but it's really important to be honest. Don't be ashamed of that. It's not a problem. It's totally normal. And see if you can resolve it anyway by leading them to another speaker, to another researcher, to a resource where they can find that answer. The other question that you might come across is, I'm sure you've had this before, you're in a session and someone asks you a question and you do want to answer that question, but you're not quite ready to do that. Well, here you can also ask for the chair to move to another speaker to answer and come back to you afterwards. Just say, that's a good question. I need a bit of reflection time. Do you mind moving on to another speaker and then come back to me afterwards? And that just gives you a little bit of breathing time to gather your thoughts and come up with the right answer that you wanted to give. And it's really important to have these discussions with the chair and the other speakers in your session to figure out how you want to manage difficult questions or anyway the flow of the whole session. I'm going to pause there and have some water. Does anyone have any questions about anything we've covered so far? Catherine has asked, I'll just take this, Tracy, because I know the answer. If we have a poll, will we submit this ahead of time? Yes, you will. Tracy will tell you at the end of our session what the deadline is for that, and that's coming up soon. So yes. Catherine, clarify the question. Yes, how do you handle a question from the audience that is not really a question? Well, the good thing is that you are not taking live questions. So sometimes at a conference, you have someone who just wants to say something and they'll hog the microphone for a while, right? We've all seen this, and it's really hard to interrupt them. There are ways, but for the online world, we're only getting questions through a chat function. And it's the moderator's role to actually filter them. And as Tracy was explaining, these are physios themselves, and so they will know if it's a bit off topic, and people are less likely to anyway just give their own opinion and expect that to be addressed, although it might be interesting information as well. But so in the online space, it's not really going to happen in this format, so don't worry about it. Okay, Sybil's asking an interesting question about the use of hands. I'm going to hold that one. Sybil, I'm going to answer that in a couple of minutes because we haven't talked about the online setup yet. So let me do that in a bit. So in fact, that is my next agenda point. And I know that we're heading towards the hour. I do have lots of information to share with you. If you can stay on past the hour, that would really be great. So virtual setup. So we know our message, we know who we're speaking to. We're going to use the time wisely in the planning sessions to think about engaging the audience, etc. But the other thing you have with the online world is you can't just turn up and have a mic pinned on you and you stand on the stage or the mic handed to you. You have these other technological challenges, and it's worth thinking about these and preparing them. Remember, you are now a TV presenter. So you need to look professional, and it's worth setting yourself up in that space. So how do we do that? We start with the camera. So the camera should be set at eye level and directly onto the eye. So you may want to stand to do your presentation, in which case you want to frame yourself from sort of the hips upwards so that you can use your hands and you can move a little bit. So again, you might need to find a space in your office or in your home where you can do that. I can't do that in this space. I need to be sitting because of my funny ceilings. But if I wanted to sit, I'd probably set myself up in my kitchen living room where I have a bit more space. So with the camera, most modern laptops have an okay camera, but have a look and see if it's good enough. You might find that you can borrow a better quality camera from someone else, a colleague or a friend. A lot of people have reasonably good equipment these days, and if you ask around, you'll probably be able to just upscale your video a little bit, and that will be worth it, I would say, for a live presentation such as yours. Now, the other thing about, so you want to set it at eye level and straight on. So that might mean that you need to put your laptop on a box or a stack of books. And the other thing is you want it to be straight on. So I'm sure you have all seen these presentations, okay, or these ones, where, you know, you're looking up my nose far too much, and it's just not, it's not very nice at all. Or maybe you've seen the hiding at the side of the screen type things. So it's important to try to get your camera set up in a way that it's straight on. It is your eye contact with the audience, and it's really important to set it up properly. Now, there's no point having a great setup of your camera if there is no lighting, right? So your lighting is also a very crucial part of the puzzle. So this would be how I would be lit if I just had my overhead light on. And so I usually use two different lights. One is a lamp and one is a proper ring light, but you don't need any professional equipment. You might just need to get a bedside lamp or a standing lamp and just position them behind the camera. We put them behind the camera so they're illuminating the face with minimal shadow. And you don't want to put the light behind you because that can create a silhouette, and then we just can't see your eyes, which is the eye contact, and your expressions, which is a real pity. Excuse me. Now the next thing is sound. Hopefully I didn't deafen you with my coughing there. I'm just recovering from a cold. So again, your laptop probably has an okay microphone inbuilt into it, but you might need to minimize the background noise or upgrade your sound by having either plug-in, simple plug-in headphones or over the ears, for example. Or you may see if someone around you has a better quality microphone that you can borrow for your session. You might have the best message to be giving and be well prepared, but if we can't hear you, then that's a real pity. So, you know, really look into your microphone as well. The next thing is the background. So ideally we're looking for quite a neutral, uncluttered space behind you, which doesn't confuse the audience. So you can have some character in it, but make sure it's not distracting. We do not recommend virtual backgrounds. And the reason is that unless you have a green screen, you've probably seen people float in and out of these virtual backgrounds, or hands suddenly appear out of nowhere. So they're a bit hit and miss. So if you can find a space that is neutral behind you, that will be better than using a virtual background, please. As I said, stand if you feel comfortable, but remember that wherever you're setting yourself up, have a look at what is framed, and even jump on a call with a friend or a colleague for them to check what your setup is with, and maybe you need to try different places and setups within your available space. So as I think it was Sybil was asking, she asked about, you know, she uses her hands a lot, and so do I, and hopefully it's not distracting how I do it. What might be good is giving yourself a little bit more space, sitting on the edge of your chair, so you engage your core, you ground your feet, you've got good airflow, and then you've got more space. So it shows your enthusiasm and things like that. Maybe you even want to do a demonstration of some sort of physical demonstration. So again, think about what is in that frame and prepare it really well. In terms of what you wear, you need to feel comfortable. You need to feel authentic. If you don't want to wear a shirt and tie, for example, gentlemen, don't put a shirt and tie on if it's not you. You want to feel comfortable, so you could be in the normal clothes you would use where in the clinic or the hospital, wherever you're working. Excuse me. You are welcome to use traditional costume as well. Just be careful, because a lot of traditional costumes are quite busy with different patterns and colors, and that can be quite distracting, especially with a live video. So if possible, we prefer bold or block colors, which are less confusing for the video to pick up on. So take a minute now to think about your own setup, and I'm going to look at the questions. What needs to change for your own setup? Make a note of it now, otherwise you will forget. Do you need to find a different place so that you can take this live session? Do you need to borrow a better camera or microphone, maybe? Do you need to get your bedside lamp involved in lighting your beautiful face? Have you scheduled time in your diary to practice speaking live? Speaking to the camera with the setup. It's much better if you practice in advance. You'll feel much more comfortable and be more likely to do a good job. Do you need to ask for some help from a friend or a colleague? Now, I saw a couple of questions come in. So Sybil, I think I answered yours. Sybil asked, as a physiotherapist, she uses her hands quite a bit whilst explaining, and she noticed that I do as well. Do you think this is distracting? I think it's human. I think it's good. There's a whole chapter of training we could go into with body language, but if you feel comfortable doing it, please do use your hands. I think it's even worse if you see people sort of wanting to use their hands but not feeling like they can. So just set yourself up well so that you have the space to do that. So Sean is asking, okay, Tracy, you can answer that later, maybe. A question about the webinar mode, and is the moderator on camera? And I think Tracy will answer that as well. So those two we can answer a little bit later as we wrap up the session. The other thing is just to practice speaking to the camera. As I said, it is your eye contact. You will see if I've been presenting the whole time, reading my notes or looking at the other presenters, at some stage you probably switch off. It's much easier for you to keep engaged and feel like I'm speaking to you because I speak directly into the camera. And this takes practice. So you may like to put a picture or an arrow near your camera, or maybe, some people put a soft toy, again, that can help if you feel like you're speaking into a void. If you've got a cute little teddy bear to talk to, it might help you a little bit. So, but do practice doing that. And you can even record yourself, or over the next couple of weeks, when you go, if you do have live Zoom calls or Teams or whatever, you can just pay attention to how people are doing things and how you're doing it, and maybe you can improve them a little bit before the actual live session. Okay, did any other questions come up? I don't think so. Okay, good. So we've got the great setup, we know what we're saying. I just wanted to touch on a few things about presenting live. People want to see you. They want to see the face behind the message. They want to see real people. We search for that connection. And as I've said, you are now a TV presenter. You will be seen by the audience, and you need to look interesting when you're speaking to keep them engaged. So as I said, practice speaking to the camera. That is your eye contact. And just doing that will make a huge difference to the audience feeling like you're speaking to them and keeping engaged. Remember that you won't be able to see the audience, and it doesn't matter how many people are in the audience. You should give your all, no matter, even if you're speaking just with the chair. Don't worry about that. The people will watch it, record it if they're not there live, and it's not a problem. I know that your message is important, and you should make sure the energy is up as much as possible to get that across. And remember, this is an interesting one. When you're sitting on stage in the conference, maybe on the sofa, you are on stage and you are seen always. What's interesting that I've seen on speaking virtually is that people forget that they're still on camera. So throughout your session, you will all be on camera, even if the technical team won't be necessarily focusing on you totally. What we don't want to see is I'm saying something really, really interesting, and then I'm finishing. We don't want to see that. You are on stage. You are part of the session. Please continue to look at the camera. Smile, nod, look interested. If you're frowning the whole time, again, that can be really off-putting. So remember that you're always on the stage. The final thing I wanted to talk about is to bring interest into your voice. And again, this really helps speaking and keeping the energy, speaking online and keeping your energy up. You can vary your pace, your volume, your pitch, and use pauses to really take your presentation skills to the next level. I'm sure you've heard people speak like this, and even if they've got a really interesting presentation and message to give, you can only listen to this for so long. I hope you agree. So there are things you can do, and I just wanted to give you a little exercise so that you could start practicing and playing with your voice a little bit and being brave and seeing how much interest and color you can actually bring into your voice. So I have one sentence for us to practice one. I'm sure you've heard it before. I don't know where it came from, but it's inspired me speaking with you physios. Move it or lose it. It's a nice little sound bite. I'd like you to take a deep breath, diaphragmatic, I'm sure you all know what that is, and say with conviction, move it or lose it. With conviction. Now, I can't hear you. I hope you're playing along. Say move it or lose it with conviction, like you really mean it. Maybe you want one of the kids to move themselves, or you might want someone to move the truck out of the way, something like that. Move it or lose it. Now, what do we do with our voices to get conviction? We're probably louder than we would naturally speak, and possibly we bring our pitch slightly lower as well, which brings more oomph into it. So let's try, again, the same phrase, but in an excited way. Okay, you're really excited about this. Move it or lose it. You know, you really want to energize someone and you're like, cheerleader, move it or lose it. Try it. You're excited. Tell me, move it or lose it. Go for it. Okay, so how do you get it more excited voice? You speak faster and with a higher pitch. And you do this automatically because you know, if you think about the emotion, your voice actually knows. So we just need to let our voice do what it wants to do to get those emotions through and not be afraid of those emotions. Last one, suspense. Now for suspense, we use a pause. It's very, very powerful. For example, move it or lose it. Try that. Big pause before the end. Move it or lose it. Really powerful. And those three ways that we've said these things, same sentence, can change totally the perception of the audience. So I know this is a little bit of a theatre game maybe, but I just wanted to show you that you can use your voice to express different emotions, and you shouldn't be shy of doing that. For some reason, the camera sucks the energy out of people's voices and in general. And so we almost need to give more than we would normally give on site stage. Live. So practice, again, the last thing is just to practice, to be comfortable with your setup so you feel ready to go on the day. You still have a month before the event, more than a month, plenty of time to engage with your other panelists and the chair, to think about all your message, to think about, see if you can get a really nice sound bite, to explore your voice maybe over the next couple of weeks as you have conversations. See what you can do with that. See if you can take your voice to the next level. Now, before I hand back to Tracy, I just wanted to see, I know I've given a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I hope you found it useful. What I'd like you to do, and again, this is something you can do with your audience, is get people to commit to doing something. So usually in my training, I ask, what one thing will you do differently or stop doing? Write it in the chat. What did you get out of this training? What do you want to change? Maybe you want to stop doing something, start doing something, look more into doing something. It could be you want to focus on your technical setup. Maybe you want to explore your voice. You want to come up with a nice, catchy sound bite. Great, Catherine, look at the camera directly. Yes, so important, but it takes practice. Focus on strategic use of voice. Great, Sean. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing you on the day. Play with your voice. Focus on the setup. Great. And make sure you carve in time to do that. Not only have your preparation session, your planning meeting, and really take that seriously, but also to think about your own setup and how you come across on camera. Practice the Q&A with the panel. Thank you, Catherine. Fabulous. Well, I'm sticking around for question and answers, and I can pass it back to you now, Tracy.
Many thanks, Helen. Some really great tips there. And I think every time we participate in these, something else comes up, but really important takeaway messages for everybody. So I'm just going to answer a couple of questions that came up. One of them was, what platform are we using? Are we using Zoom, which is what we're using today during the live event? And no, we're not. We're working with a TV production company alongside our scientific program management system, which enables them to do as Helen described. They will be able to choose to zoom in on one particular person or to zoom out. So it will be much more of a TV production feel rather than static heads on a screen. But at the same time, very similar functionality with regard to what we've described around polls, questions, and chat. There was also a question from Caroline around, will moderators be on screen? And our plan is for the moderators to be on screen. It means they can also signal if they think they've kept an eye, there's a really important question up that resonates with a point here that it would be good to draw in. So they will be very much a part of your team and able, as I say, part of your planning is that hand signaling thing, or the token that you're going to lift up, the red card warning if there's a time, or is it something else where you need to intervene? So that's going to be coming into your planning sessions, and the moderators we're doing very specific training on as well, so that they understand. For certainly, part of this is also telling them not to paraphrase or reword someone's question and make it into something longer than it needs to be to put their own spin on it. So we're very mindful of all those things as well. So I think that's all the questions actually answered. So let's just come back to share screens. Just bear with me. Okay, so I think we've done questions. So let's just move along, not backwards, forwards. There we go. Key dates. So the 1st of March, all the programme notices went out, and this was, I have to say, a major undertaking with the team, putting all the various jigsaw pieces together, and time zones have really added to the complexities this time. So I think just on behalf of all of us, thank you for working with us on the time zones. We've had, I think the extreme is, I think I counted up 19 hours of time zone difference in one particular session, and it's huge. So thank you for working with us. We've done as much as we can to minimise those stresses. Early March, actually tomorrow, the platform will be going live, and you'll be able to see all the various sessions and explore it in more detail. The 15th to the 29th of March, you should all have had information around a technical rehearsal. So that's when you will be joining our TV production side, and that's really to check, have you got a good headset? Is the sound good? What about your lighting? Just to understand how that system will actually be operating. Someone asked earlier as well around the poll questions. So in all of your planning, your team will need to decide by the 26th of March what your questions are, and you'll be asked to email those in to our team at World Physiotherapy, and then they will be put into the system, and it will be the moderator that then launches those. So we just need to be clear when a poll needs launching in the same way as we do during this session. 31st of March, there's an embargo on all the abstracts being lifted. And then obviously 9th to the 11th, we're live, plus all the on-demand content, that's all the abstract volume, and things shifting once they've been recorded into on-demand. But everything is there until the 8th of July, access to all demand. So we know this is where, it's one of the big benefits of being online. People can come back, bite-sized chunks to digest things that they couldn't normally do when having to make choices on site. So I think we just want to end with the same question we asked you with at the beginning. How confident do you feel about presenting at Congress? So we've got the poll up again, and we'd be interested in your thoughts at this time. Okay, so good levels of confidence. I think further is going to come by taking the time to reflect on a lot of the information that Helen has shared. We also, I would stress, go back to our speaker training area on our website. We're continuing to add further content there. The webinars are there. We'll also be putting up some presentation tips for the different types of session formats. If we haven't covered them all, that's continuing to be put on. You have slightly less time pressure than those that have to upload content by the 11th of March. So I think I'd like to thank Rach from our team, who's in the background running the webinar. I'm just scanned over the chat. I don't think there's any other questions. Thanks to Helen for working with us. Again, a real pleasure to bring your expertise to everything that we're doing. And also to say to you, enjoy the event. It is difficult when I can't see you now. You know, Helen and I can at least see each other. We want you to have a positive experience. It is a first for all of us. We're all got high expectations, but we're also realistic. It's a challenge and it's new for many people to participate in, both from delivering the content and on the receiving side. But we're a really strong community and we're really excited to be bringing our community together at this time. So good luck with all your preparations. And if you need anything further from us, do please contact us. We want you to have the best experience possible for everybody's benefit. And we'll see you online in April. Many thanks, everybody. Bye for now.